These fires started under a combination of unseasonably high temperatures, low relative humidity, and high winds that persisted for many days. These burning conditions produced very high flame lengths, rates of spread, and spotting ahead of the main fire, as well as a 24-hour burning period and unusually wide flaming fronts that were unsafe to approach. Much fire spread occurred at night when we cannot use helicopters and air tankers to help fight the fires. Al Crouch from the BLM Vail District Fire Management Team was on the Long Draw fire.
The kind of fire behavior that we saw that first night was very impressive, downright dangerous. And based on the fire's location, the amount of resources that we had and the way that we tactically had to attack the fire, it put firefighters in a very dangerous situation. Because of the rough terrain and the fact that we had limited resources and the fire was moving so quickly, we weren't keeping up with the output of the fire. At least the crews that were flanking it weren't. But we knew that at some point in time that fire was going to slow down. So the crews kept continuing with that tactic on the east side of the fire because we wanted to keep it off the highway. And the crews that came in with me were trying to basically put a catcher's mitt out in front of this thing and stop it cold in its tracks by hitting it head on. That first night, when I called and the people that I needed to call and notified the people that I needed to, quite frankly, there were some people that didn't believe me when I said the fire had a really good potential to be 250,000 acres. And they kind of looked at me starry-eyed and with this blank look on their face like, is this guy crazy? And I knew that if that south end of the fire was going to blow out, that we were looking at easy 250,000 acre fire.
Over the last couple of years, we've had some heavy winter and spring rains, which caused quite a large growth of fine fuels, grasses and shrubs. Those fuels, oftentimes after a snowstorm, would get matted down and decompose quickly. The last couple of years, there hasn't been a snowpack, and those fuels were standing.
Had a continuous fuel base, and with that continuous fuel base, the winds just pushed that fire right through it. Now, they made some really good effort as with regard to using dozers and engine crews and that sort of thing to try to corral this thing, but they knew that they just didn't have the resources yet to be able to use the tactics they would have liked to.
During that first night, fire moved north toward the 12-mile ranch. Now armed with 6 additional engines, Al Crouch sent 5 of those to protect the ranch, while 1 remained behind on White Horse Road and attempted to corral the fire. Aided by historically dry conditions, a continuing thunderstorm on top of the fire, low moisture, and strong winds, the Long Draw fire ravaged over 30,000 acres the first night alone, which grew to 300,000 acres the second night.
$300,000 acres is, especially to burn in one day, is a huge chunk of ground. And when you're trying to fight a fire that's that big and you only have a half a dozen engines or so, it's a pretty daunting task to try and prioritize which areas are most important, because obviously there's a lot of important areas of the fire that needed protected, and we couldn't protect them all at the same time. We had a large amount of help from the local ranching community and the Rangeland Fire Protection Association to assist us in that effort until we got more federal and state resources down there to give us a hand. The crews that first night worked incredibly hard to do whatever it was they could do safely. And quite frankly, those guys were, and I know it's cliche to say they're putting their lives on the line, but they did some pretty impressive work that night. We'll leave it at that.
We have a reputation with type teams as they come in and do mop-up for us. This has been a very different year. We've had teams that are really struggling to get ahead of these fires. It's hard at the rate of spread and the amount of country they're covering to even think that far ahead to be able to get ahead of the fires. We seem to be struggling, and it's no wonder, because we're seeing such extreme fire behavior and fuel moistures and rates of spread that we haven't experienced at least in the history that we know for fire. At the time, we thought they were going to hold it. It was just going to be a couple fingers on us. That took out another 170,000 acres on the Vail District. Unfortunately, Long Draw burned on the east side of basically the Oregon Canyon Mountains, really impacted those livestock permittees, and then the Holloway fire came and burned them out from the west side, and they've had just devastating losses to their operations.
An overarching federal wildfire policy is that human life and safety are the top priorities on all fires, taking precedent over protection of natural resources. This policy applies to the firefighters assigned to the fire as much as to members of the public and local communities who may be directly threatened by the fire.
One, the most important thing was to protect life and property. And that starts with firefighter safety, the lives of our firefighters, and the equipment that they operate, and making sure that everybody comes home at night. Second would be that private infrastructure, private-owned ranches, grass, cattle, fence posts, power poles, haystacks, farm equipment, whatever that might be. We don't like burning up grazing land just as much as ranchers don't like that stuff burning up. So we don't want to intentionally burn grazing habitat or sage-grouse habitat unless we absolutely have to. So I held the operation up just enough to protect the ranch and the infrastructure, and utilize the crews with the engines to hold that fire there until we got more resources coming in the next day.
Dealing with extraordinary and unfavorable conditions, crews were forced to make difficult decisions over what areas to defend and how to utilize the limited resources at their disposal.
When you're ordering support from other areas of the country, you can imagine that there's a little bit of a time delay that happens there. And I know that our local firefighters, including myself, and the local communities down there were frustrated. Why can't we get help here? Where is everybody? Well, not only is that a logistically challenging area of the district to get to, but we also had other fires going on the district too.
The Holloway Fire, 10 Mile, Banana Lake Complex, and the Lava Fire also competed for needed equipment. Resources were stretched thin across the country.
We did the best we could with what we had, and like I said, the primary concern was to keep everybody safe and try to be productive, and at some point in time we were going to get relief and help, and then once that happened we could go as hard as we wanted. The fire basically begins to create its own weather, and when you're in that kind of a situation, there's very little that you can do. We saw incredible flame lengths not typical of this fuel type on this fire. And when you have fire line intensities that are that high, there's only so much you can do.
By July 12th, Long Draw burned over 560,000 acres. Fire took out hundreds of power poles, the Department of Transportation station in Basque, and crews were forced to temporarily close the US 95 travel corridor. Though life and property were preserved, the Vail District suffered an enormous loss to the health and vitality of the landscape.
This was prime habitat or core habitat for sage-grouse. And because the question somebody asked me earlier was, where did they go? Well, that's a good question. Where did they go? We hope that they did not perish in the fire. But, right now, until probably next spring, until we get, back into the mating season, we probably won't be able to determine whether or not how many of the birds are still here.
So having been on the fire while it was burning, and then going back a few days after it had completely burned, the immensity of the area that was burned was just mind-blowing. You couldn't fathom how large this fire was. You'd be driving along and you'd go over one crest and you'd see the fire continue, where it had burned. And then you drive a little bit further and you see it still continuing and continuing and continuing where it had impacted the landscape.
It's going to have impacts to the ranching community, just in the sense that you look out here today and there's very little, there's not a lot of grasses out here. Usually we would start to see some resprouting, but again, because we've had no moisture, you're not even seeing the grasses, little tips of grasses starting to come back. So some people would refer this as a moonscape. Looking at it today, there was an ash base here just a couple weeks ago, and we're already seeing what the winds can do to that ash base. There's very little ash left today, and so that ash has been picked up and moved, and so we're going to see some erosion from just the winds itself. In the long term, we're trying to determine how much seed can we put down. This is probably a really good place to do the drilling portion of it, but it will all be dependent on how much water or moisture that we get, the amount of seed that we're able to put back in here, and how effective that seed will be if we don't get the moisture. If we don't get moisture, we'll have to be doing it again. So this is going to have a long-term effect on the district itself and on the employees that work here.
It was devastating to folks, also just the loss of the resources. I mean, the impacts to the community, to the livestock permittees, but the resources that so many of our staff are so dedicated to and have worked so hard to manage appropriately, and to see them go up in a matter of hours was devastating. It's broken people's hearts.
When all was said and done, the wildfires in Oregon, including Miller Homestead, Iron Fire, and Bonita Complex, burned over 747,000 acres, and work on these fires is not over. While wildfires are a natural part of the ecosystem, at times they create situations necessitating special rehabilitation efforts to prevent erosion and an increase in weed spread after the fire. The scale and intensity of the 2012 wildfires are unprecedented in Oregon and Washington. The BLM's Emergency Stabilization and Rehabilitation Program, ES&R, aims to conserve ecosystems' health and the sustainability of affected natural communities. ES&R is a program the federal government uses to get lands back in shape after wildfires. It's a multi-step process, and projects funded by the ES&R plan are generally completed within a 3-year funding cycle. After the districts receive funding, they'll set to work seeding the ground as quickly as possible. They'll have only a limited time frame before winter, and the seeds need to be in the ground as soon as possible so it can sprout in the spring and start outcompeting non-desirable invasive grasses.
The concern with long draws, it's such a vast extent that particularly for sagebrush to come back in, there's no seed source because there's no islands left. So seeding sagebrush is going to be one of our primary efforts. We're very concerned, and so we're trying to be strategic, trying to apply our efforts to those ground that we think we'll have the best success on, and also seeking to what degree we can to help offset for the livestock operators, but we don't have a lot of places for them to go, so we're helping to facilitate other programs like through Farm Services Administration to help provide some assistance to them.
We looked at areas that needed rehab and areas that really did not need rehab. Areas that were going to come back very well on their own with a great component of native grasses that are deep-rooted, bunch grasses that are good for the wildlife components out there.
We have miles of fence that need fixed, acres upon acres of seed that needs to go to the ground, and it's going to take us a long time to complete the rehabilitation efforts.
While we do not know the exact reason why these fires got so large, several factors are believed to have played a role. This past winter and spring were very dry, reducing the production of native grasses this year. Where native and non-native grasses are mixed, the later curing of the native grasses can dampen wildfire potential in June and July, but the lack of production likely meant that it did not happen this year. The result is a more continuous dry fuel bed than is typical, one that can easily carry fire.
This is going to be, in a lot of a lot of instances, it will be a legacy for a lot of people that will be working on this for so many years into the future. It takes a long time to reestablish sagebrush. People think, oh, you see it every way and it's out there. We've got some of the best minds that have been working on trying to reestablish sagebrush in areas, and it's really, there's a lot of factors that go into determining whether or not it will come back as quickly as we need it to.
This fire is not going away. This is going to change potentially could change the way we do business in Southeast Oregon.
But because the BLM is a multiple use agency, we want to get the land back to a condition where it is good for those sagebrush obligate species such as pygmy rabbits and sage-grouse. But we also want to take in consideration the ranchers out there where their livelihood is based on this land and the use that we allow them to have on it. One of the most difficult things about working on the east side of Oregon is to get people to understand that the fires here really do have a large impact. On the western side of Oregon, we see that large destruction to the timberlands, and we see that economic loss from the loss of that timber, or the ecological loss, or the emotional loss from the trees being gone. And it's a lot more difficult to understand that same loss here on the east side when we're dealing with more of a sagebrush grass component to the landscape.
Everybody has worked extremely hard, as well as, the livestock committees have been out there helping to provide information, helping us to fight fire. Our rural fire protection associations have been fabulous, but everybody is tired, and everybody deserves a pat on the back for the effort they've made.
Our firefighters and our staff here are going to be full steam ahead on rehab once fire season starts to wind down. It's long time from being over. We got a lot of work left to do.